Well, there's legislation that last week Congress introduced, but I think if listening to the story about Ray Shard, I think it's really important to point out something very important, because if you're going to talk about defunding the police, I think it's really important to talk about the whys and the systemic racism that has been going on in this country for far too long. And the fact that right now we're in the year 2020, which if you take 20 multiplied times 20, you get what? 400 years. 400, which is what we've had, 400 years of systemic racism going back to slavery, 1619 to now. When you look at why George Floyd was arrested and then held down and pinned down for 8 minutes and 46 seconds before he lost his life calling out for his mother, it was because he was trying to pass what they said, allegedly, but never have come out and said it was truthful, a $20 bill. And then this year, there was supposed to be a $20 bill with the picture, the image of Harriet Tubman, an African-American woman who led African-American slaves to freedom, put on the $20 bill. And this administration stopped that because it was an African-American woman. So 2020 is supposed to be about clarity and vision. You asked a question about legislation and sweeping legislation. What we are seeing across the country, because of the protests, because of people from diverse backgrounds coming forward, we've seen in Minneapolis the outlawing of chokeholds. We're seeing that city councils talk about defunding the police, which simply means reallocating the resources, because police departments keep saying, well, we're overtaxed, we have to do too much. Well, we keep seeing, as in the case with Rayshard Brooks, a young man who had been drinking, who had been pulled over, who said to the officers, hey, I was just trying to get myself together, and the overuse of force in terms of trying to get him out, and here he is feeling his life was threatened, apparently reached for the taser and tried to run. These things are happening way too much, where police are getting away with what is called here qualified immunity. And that means that a police officer can shoot, kill, hurt a person, and in the whole case of, or idea of, I felt that my life was threatened, and we keep seeing that over and over again. And so you see these protests that are going on, they're going on because people are sick and tired of being killed simply because of the color of our skin.
And that, I understand, is one of the parts of the legislation to remove that qualified immunity. But I wanted to ask you, for people outside of the U.S., and you touched a bit on this, who don't understand about policing in America, some of the unique obstacles against reforming it, the really odd police union structure that we have in the U.S., the fact that police are involved in routine traffic stops that often really increase the tensions between people of color and police. Can you talk a little bit about those unique things here?
Yeah, I mean, even for me, going back to being a teenager, I can tell, because we don't have enough time, but I could tell you stories about having been pulled over and then the police leaving, never issuing me a ticket because I started looking at their badge numbers and calling them out. There's a systemic issue here. You keep hearing the president talk about law and order. Well, for those of us in the African-American community, law and order is a term that goes back to slavery. It's a term, when you look at the police forces that are here, it goes back to the slave patrols that were used to keep us in line. As slavery grew in America, so did the number of slaves. We were outnumbering the slave owners, so in order to keep us in check, they needed slave patrols. In order to keep us in check today, they use police patrols. And if you look at what the president continues to talk about, is law and order. Law and order was typically supposed to mean protecting the property. The property was the slave. Well, now it's protecting the business, because you see people are upset about the riots and what have you that's going on. People are tired, and they're not tearing down things just to tear them down. I mean, if you look at the language from the president, the fact that he was on June 19th, which is a big symbolic day for African Americans, and then picking Tulsa, Oklahoma to have this rally, though he's changed the date now because, and I'm assuming it was because of his advisor saying you can't do it on that day. But I think your viewers should also know that there's a historic piece of white America burning down affluent, wealthy, rich African American stuff. If you go back to, I think it was 1921, where there was an affluent African-American community living in Tulsa, Oklahoma, that during that time plumbing wasn't a everyday thing. African Americans had that because these were millionaire African Americans living in this town, and an African American man was accused of raping a white woman who never ever said this. The police used this, took it out of course. Whites came, they burned down. 9,000 African Americans were left homeless as a result. And I would encourage your viewers to go and look up the Tulsa race riots or Black Wall Street, because this thing that you're seeing here, this fire that has been ignited here, it is the byproduct of centuries of African Americans being sick and tired of being accused of things, of losing our own property. And this whole idea of defunding the police is basically to say, why do we have to keep paying a police force that's only going to kill our young men, our young women, our children?
Atiba, I want to ask you, smartphones, mobile phones have changed a lot of this struggle. The way that we've seen the response following George Floyd, the way that we see the response, the speed at which there's a response of Rayshard Brooks as well. Your thoughts?
It's a way that we get to turn the page. It's a way that the rest of the world can see that what we've been saying, and those people here. That's why I think you see in terms of when you see these protests around the country, I think that's why you're seeing the diversity that's there. If you go back to the 60s with Dr. King, Congressman John Lewis, and many others walking across the Selma Bridge and being attacked, it wasn't until the cameras came in and saw African Americans being fire hosed and dogs being sicked on us that the rest of the world's heart didn't start to really feel like, wait, this racism problem is something we need to look at. And I think that's what you're seeing now. This is the human rights moment of today, where you see these smartphones are capturing the 8 minutes and 46 seconds. It's capturing young people and others, Eric Garner in New York being held in the chokehold. And unfortunately, there are too many other stories. I mean, we're not talking about tens or hundreds. We're talking about thousands of stories that are like this, but now they're being captured on these smartphones because what else do we have? And it's a great thing to see that the rest of the world, especially this country, from a diverse standpoint, is coming together to say that yes, Black lives do matter.